stars. They had fought and conquered countless worlds and species. Who dared to challenge their might? They were powerful, unstoppable, nothing could break them, or... So they thought it was on one of their routine expeditions that they first encountered him, a human alone on a remote planet. They had never seen a human before, and had no idea of what this creature was capable of at first. They thought it was just another weak life form, just another creature that would be easy to overpower and enslave for their experiments. Human stood alone in the middle of a barren field. His clothes were torn and dirty, as if he had been traveling for days. But there was something different about him, something that the aliens could not place their finger on, something that made them pause for just a moment. Before they decided to strike, the aliens were curious, so they landed their ship with the precision they were known for. Silently and without a sound, they surrounded the human from all sides. Weapons ready, their advanced technology ensuring that they were well prepared for any possible resistance. The human didn't move, didn't seem to notice them at all. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if lost in thought. One of the aliens, the commander of the squad, stepped forward and shouted in a language that was not their own, in a voice that echoed across the silent field. "Human, you are in the presence of the Andromeda Dominion. You will submit to our will or be destroyed." The human didn't respond, not even a flinch. He just kept staring ahead, a strange calmness about him, as if he knew something they didn't. Commander's patience wore thin. The human was defying them, ignoring them. He ordered his troops to take aim, but as the first shots rang out, the human simply turned his head and smiled as if he had expected it. The aliens fired their weapons with deadly precision, blasts of energy cutting through the air, yet the human didn't fall. Not even a single wound appeared on his body. He didn't even seem to flinch. He just stood there smiling as the shots hit him over and over again. The commander's eyes widened in disbelief. "What is this?" he muttered. "How is he still standing?" They fired again and again, but each blast seemed to do nothing. The human just laughed as though he found their attacks amusing. And that laughter, it wasn't the laughter of a man who feared death. No, it was the laughter of a man who had nothing to fear, who knew that they would never break him. "How can this be?" one of the soldiers whispered under his breath. "Is he immortal?" The commander didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. This was unlike anything they had ever faced before, and it terrified him. For the first time in their long history of conquests, they were faced with an enemy that didn't fear death, didn't fear pain, and seemed to grow stronger the more they tried to kill him. The commander gave the order to retreat. "We need more firepower," he said. But even as he turned to signal for reinforcements, the human's laughter echoed in the distance. Was a laugh that shook them to their core and made them realize something they hadn't thought possible. This human was not afraid of them. They had encountered many species before, those who bowed before them in fear, those who were quick to surrender at the first sign of their power. But this human wasn't like them. This human was different. As the aliens retreated to their ship and began to regroup, the commander couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a huge mistake by underestimating the human. They had expected an easy victory. They had expected to crush him like they had done with so many others before. But now they realized that this human was unlike any enemy they had ever faced. This was not just a fight for survival. This was a test of their strength, their resolve, and their ability to adapt, because they knew that the human would not stop. Not now, not ever. And so as they flew back to their ship to plan their next move, they could still hear the human's laughter echoing in the distance, a reminder that even in the face of their advanced weapons and endless power, there was still something in this universe that could not be defeated, something that could not be broken, something that would keep coming no matter how many times it was struck down. The human had shown them something that they had never considered before, the true meaning of resilience and the power of a spirit that could never be defeated. No matter the odds, the aliens had no idea what they were up against, but they were about to find out. The resilience of humanity. The aliens regrouped in their ship, their minds racing, trying to understand what had just happened. They had never encountered anything like the human before. They had faced many powerful species in their time, but none had ever withstood their attacks, let alone laughed in the face of death. They sat in their control room. The commander paced back and forth, still unable to shake the image of the human standing there, unscathed, as if their weapons had no effect on him. The soldier who had fired the first shot looked at the commander nervously. "Sir, we need more firepower. He's not like any species we've ever encountered." The commander turned to him, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and confusion. "I know that, but what are we dealing with? We've thrown everything at him, and he just stands there, like it's nothing. We need to figure out what makes him tick." One of the higher-ranking officers spoke up from across the room. "Perhaps it's time we take a different approach. If our weapons don't work, maybe we should try something else." The commander looked at the officer, his mind racing. "What do you mean? We've never tried to understand the species we conquer before." Officer replied, "We always rely on force and intimidation. But what if this human is different? What if he's not like the others we've encountered? What if we could study him, learn from him?" The commander stopped pacing and looked at the officer, considering his words for a long moment, before nodding. "All right, prepare a team. We'll try a different approach. We need to understand him before we make our next move." And so the plan was set into motion. The aliens would no longer rely solely on force to bring down the human. They would observe him, study his behavior, and figure out what made him so resilient. Meanwhile, the human had made his way deeper into the alien territory. He was still laughing to himself, not in a maniacal way, but with a kind of triumphant joy, as if he had just proven something to himself, something that had always been there, but had been buried deep within him. Knew they would come for him again. It was inevitable. The aliens were not going to give up easily. They were a proud species, and they didn't like being shown up, but the human wasn't afraid of them. He wasn't afraid of anything. Had been through too much in his life to be afraid of death or pain, or even the unknown. He had faced his demons and overcome them, and this was just another challenge, one that he was going to rise to. Just like all the others, he had been pushed to the brink so many times in his life that death no longer seemed like something to fear. It was just another part of the journey, another step in the process of becoming who he was meant to be. But the aliens didn't understand that they didn't understand that it wasn't just about strength or power. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be measured by weapons or technology. It was the human spirit, the unyielding determination to keep going, no matter what, no matter how many times you're knocked down. You get up and you keep going, because you know that the fight isn't over until you decide it is. And so the aliens watched from afar as the human continued his journey through their territory. They couldn't understand how he could be so calm, how he could face everything they threw at him without even flinching. It was as if he knew something they didn't. The days passed. The aliens became more and more obsessed with understanding him. They sent out teams to track his movements, to observe his behavior, to try and figure out what made him tick. They learned that the human didn't sleep like they did. He didn't eat like they did. He didn't even breathe like they did. It was as if his body was not bound by the same laws of nature that governed every other living creature. They learned that he could survive in extreme conditions that would have killed any other species without even breaking a sweat. He could endure pain and hardship that would cripple the strongest of warriors, yet he would never stop. He would never give up. The aliens began to realize that they were not dealing with a mere mortal. They were dealing with something else, something that defied everything they had ever known about strength and survival. But still they could not understand it. They could not comprehend how this human could be so resilient, how he could keep coming, no matter how many times they tried to stop him. And so they continued their pursuit, trying everything they could think of to break him, to defeat him, to prove that no one was stronger than the Andromeda Dominion. But with every attack, with every failed attempt, their respect for him grew. They had never encountered anything like this before. Finally, after weeks of observation and failure, the commander called for a meeting with his highest ranking Officers, he knew they needed a new strategy. They needed to learn from the human instead of trying to destroy him. We've been attacking him from all sides, trying to break him with weapons and force. But it's not working, the commander said, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and awe. Maybe it's time we try something different. Maybe we can learn from him instead of fighting him. The officers looked at each other in silence before one spoke up. You want us to learn from the human after everything we've seen? And if we continue to see them as just another enemy, we'll never understand what makes them so strong. And so the alien society began to shift their focus. They started to study the human, not as a threat, but as a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. They watched him more closely. They learned his habits, his movements, his strategies, and with every new discovery, they began to realize that the human's greatest strength was not in his body, it was in his mind, his spirit, his unbreakable will to survive. But even as they began to understand the human more, they still couldn't comprehend how one man could be so powerful, how one person could face down an entire species and refuse to back down. The aliens were forced to confront the fact that they had underestimated the human in ways they never thought possible, and in doing so they had learned something that would change their entire perspective on strength and survival. Forever understanding the human, the aliens spent weeks studying the human. They observed his every move from a distance. They noted his actions, his behavior, his patterns of survival, and still they couldn't understand how he managed to survive. They had seen nothing like him before. They had studied countless species across the galaxy, but none had ever withstood their attacks like this one. It was as though the human was something more than just flesh and bone. He was a mystery wrapped in a puzzle, one that they could not solve no matter how much they tried. First conclusion was that the human was simply too stubborn to die, but as they gathered more data, they began to realize that it wasn't just about stubbornness. It was something deeper, something that made him keep going, something that fueled him when everything else should have brought him down. The aliens brought in their best scientists, their top researchers, the ones who had developed weapons that could destroy entire planets. They hoped that these experts could uncover the secret to the human's incredible resilience. One of the scientists, named Zora, had spent her entire career studying the biology of countless species. She had studied everything from the strongest predators to the most fragile creatures, and she had seen how their bodies responded to damage. But the human was different. No matter how much damage he took, he kept coming back stronger every time. It was as if his body had learned how to adapt to the attacks, or maybe he was evolving in real time. Zora was baffled. She knew that no species could adapt that quickly. No creature could heal so rapidly without some form of external help. Yet this human showed no signs of any enhancement technology, no implants, no genetic modifications. Just a regular human in appearance, but with abilities beyond anything she had ever seen. Zora spent countless hours in the lab poring over data. She ran simulations and tests. She even attempted to mimic the conditions that the human had survived, to try and replicate his resilience. But no matter what she did, she couldn't recreate it. It was as if the human was an anomaly, something that broke all the rules of biology and science. One evening, as Zora sat in the lab staring at the screen, she made a breakthrough. She realized that the human wasn't just surviving the attacks. He was absorbing them. He was somehow adapting to the damage, as if his body was learning from every injury and using that knowledge to protect him from future harm. It wasn't just physical resilience, it was mental resilience too. The human had somehow found a way to turn pain into power, to turn suffering into strength, and in doing so he had become something far more dangerous than the aliens had ever imagined. Zora couldn't believe it. She had to share her discovery with the commander, but she knew that telling him would not be enough. The other officers needed to understand this too. They needed to know that they weren't just facing the human, they were facing something much more dangerous, something that couldn't be destroyed by force alone. She called for a meeting with the High Council of the aliens. They gathered In the command room where Zora presented her findings, she explained how the human's body and mind had developed a unique ability to adapt to every attack, every injury, and how this ability was allowing him to survive things that no other species could withstand. She explained that they were dealing with a being who could not be broken by normal means. They had underestimated him from the beginning, and now it was too late to simply destroy him. The council listened in silence as Zora spoke, their minds racing as they processed the information. They had always believed that physical power was the key to victory. They had conquered so many species through sheer force, but now they were faced with something that didn't obey their rules. It didn't care about their weapons, their technology, or their superiority in numbers. This human was a different kind of enemy, a force that couldn't be measured by their standards. The commander spoke first, his voice grave. "So you're saying that we can't destroy him by force alone?" Zora nodded. "Exactly. We've been attacking him the wrong way. We've been trying to overpower him, without understanding that his strength comes from something deeper, something beyond physical power. We need to rethink our approach." Another officer spoke up. "But if we can't destroy him with force, how do we defeat him?" Zora hesitated. She had thought about that very question for days. "I'm not sure, but I believe the key lies in understanding him. We've been treating him as an enemy to be vanquished, but what if he's not just an opponent? What if he's a symbol of something greater, something that we can learn from?" The commander's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting we let him go?" Zora shook her head. "No, we can't let him go. He's already proven that he won't stop until we're all gone, but we don't have to destroy him with weapons. We need to find a way to confront him in a way that challenges his spirit. We need to test him mentally and emotionally as much as physically. We need to force him to question his own will to fight." The room fell silent as the council processed Zora's words. They had always seen strength as a matter of physical dominance, but now they had to reconsider what true strength really meant. The commander leaned forward, his eyes filled with determination. "If we can't break him with force, we will break him in another way. We'll make him question everything he believes in, everything that makes him who he is." The council agreed on the new strategy. They would no longer rely on brute force alone. They would study the human psyche. They would attempt to find his weaknesses not in his body, but in his mind. They would push him to his limits, not by attacking him physically, but by testing his emotions, his beliefs, and his resolve. Human had shown them that resilience wasn't just about surviving pain. It was about refusing to give up no matter the odds, no matter the cost. And if the aliens wanted to defeat him, they would have to learn how to destroy that resolve. And so they set their plan into motion. They would confront the human in ways he had never imagined. They would test him not by the strength of their weapons, but by the strength of his own spirit. They would push him to the edge and force him to confront the very essence of what it meant to be human. Battle was no longer just about power. It was about the mind, the heart, and the unbreakable will to survive. The turning point. The alien forces had always prided themselves on their power and superiority across the galaxies. They believed no species could stand against them. No creature could endure their might, yet here they were faced with something they had never expected, a human whose resilience defied all their understanding of strength and survival. They had tried everything. They had launched attack after attack with their most advanced weapons, but nothing worked. The human just laughed and kept coming back stronger than before. The commander of the alien forces sat in his command room, staring out the window at the stars, his mind weighed down by the realization that they had been outmatched by a single human, a species they had once considered insignificant. How had it come to this? They had fought countless wars and conquered countless planets, but this human was different. This human was not afraid of death, not afraid of their weapons or their power. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems as the commander turned to his officers seated around the table. "We have failed at every turn," he said, his voice low and filled with frustration. "We have thrown everything at him, and yet he continues to resist. He continues to survive." One of the officers spoke up. "Commander, perhaps it is time we stop seeing him as an enemy to be destroyed and start seeing him as something else, something we cannot comprehend." The commander looked at the officer, a hint of surprise in his eyes. What do you mean? Perhaps this human is not just a force of nature to be broken. Perhaps he is the very definition of something we have never understood, the unyielding spirit of survival, the refusal to give up no matter the cost, the officer replied. Perhaps we are not meant to conquer him, we are meant to learn from him. The commander sat in silence, his mind racing. The officer's words struck a chord within him. They had always fought to dominate, to conquer, to break. But this human was not interested in domination. He was interested in something much deeper, something beyond mere survival. He was fighting for something that was unmeasurable to the aliens, and that was what made him dangerous. Another officer spoke up. If we cannot break him with force, then we must change our tactics. We need to understand him from within. We need to find his weaknesses and exploit them. But we must approach this carefully. We cannot underestimate the strength of his resolve. We will break him from within. We will force him to confront everything that he believes in, everything that makes him who he is. The new plan was set into motion. The aliens would now turn their attention to the human's mind and spirit. They would push him to the brink. They would test his resolve in ways that no physical attack ever could. The commander and his officers understood that defeating this human was no longer about physical dominance. It was about psychological warfare. They would challenge his beliefs, his emotions, his very essence as a human being. The human had been moving through the alien territory for days since his encounter with them. He had been laughing at their futile attempts to stop him. His mind was clear. His heart was unbroken. They could not touch him. They could not defeat him. They could not break him. He had been through too much in his life to fear death or pain, and now he realized that this was more than just a fight for survival. This was a battle for something much more important. This was a battle for his spirit, his will to never give up, no matter what, no matter how impossible the odds were. He would not stop, he would not break. But even as he moved forward deeper into enemy territory, he began to feel a strange sense of unease. It wasn't fear, but something he couldn't quite place. He had faced down countless enemies in his life, but none had ever made him feel like this before. It was as if the very air around him had shifted, as if the enemy was no longer just attacking him with weapons. They were attacking him with something more insidious, something that threatened to break him from the inside. The first attack came in the form of a message. It was broadcast into his mind, a voice speaking directly to him. Human, why do you continue to fight? Why do you refuse to accept defeat? You have already lost. You are nothing but a tool to be used and discarded by forces greater than you. The human paused as the voice echoed in his mind for a moment. He felt a flicker of doubt, but then he laughed to himself. You think you can break me with words, he muttered. You think you can defeat me with mind games. The voice responded, we are not trying to break you with words, we are trying to break you with the truth. You are nothing more than a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things, a meaningless speck in the vastness of the universe. Your fight is pointless, and your suffering is inevitable. But the human didn't flinch. He stood tall and continued moving forward. You are wrong, he said quietly. I fight because I choose to fight. I fight because I will not be broken by anyone or anything, no matter how powerful they are. The voice fell silent for a moment before it spoke again. Then prepare yourself for what comes next. The second attack came in the form of a vision. The human found himself standing in a dark void. A shadowy figure stood before him. The figure was tall and imposing, its face hidden in darkness. You think you are strong, the figure said, but you are weak. You are nothing but a puppet pulled by the strings of fate. You have no control over your life, your choices, your future. The human felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he knew he could not let it control him. I control my own fate, he said. I control my own choices, and I choose to keep going no matter what you throw at me. The figure laughed. You are nothing but a fool who refuses to accept the truth. You will never escape your fate. You will never be free of the pain, the suffering, the endless battles you fight for no reason. The human's heart raced, but he stood firm. I don't fight for nothing. I fight Because I am alive and I will continue to fight until my last breath, because that is who I am. The figure's laugh echoed around him as the vision faded, and the human found himself standing once more in the alien landscape, but something had changed within him, something had shifted in his soul. The aliens were trying to break him. They were trying to force him to question everything he believed in, everything that made him who he was, but they had underestimated one thing. They had underestimated the strength of his spirit. The human wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something more than that. He was fighting for his soul, for the right to exist on his own terms. And no matter how much the aliens pushed him, no matter how much they tested him, they would never be able to break that. Had reached his turning point. He knew now that the battle was not just about strength. It was about the will to keep going. When everything else tried to bring you down, and the human's will would never be broken. The moment of truth. The tension in the alien command room had reached an all-time high. The officers and commanders sat in silence watching the monitors there, eyes fixed on the human as he moved deeper into their territory. They had done everything they could to break him. They had tried physical force, psychological manipulation. They had tested him beyond any normal creature's endurance, yet still the human persisted. His will was unshakable. His spirit remained unbroken. They had underestimated him from the start. They had seen him as just another weak species to conquer. But now they realized that this human was something entirely different. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something deeper, something that no weapon, no attack could touch. He was fighting for his very essence, for the right to exist on his own terms, and the aliens had no idea how to stop that. The commander of the alien forces stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the monitor, showing the human's progress. "We've tried everything," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Weapons failed, mental manipulation failed. We even tried to make him doubt himself, and still he keeps going." He paused for a moment, his mind racing. "What is it about this human that we can't defeat?" An officer spoke up. "It's not just his body we're fighting against. It's his mind, his spirit. He has an unyielding determination that we can't understand. We've been treating him like an enemy to be conquered, but he's more than that. He's a symbol of something we've never encountered before." The commander nodded slowly. "Yes, he's not just a warrior. He's an embodiment of the very thing we've tried to destroy in every species we've encountered: resilience, the ability to endure and persist, no matter the odds." Another officer spoke. "If we cannot break him through force, then perhaps it's time we change tactics entirely. Perhaps we should approach him not as an enemy, but as something to be understood. Perhaps we need to ask ourselves why he continues to fight, why he refuses to give up." Commander thought for a moment. "We've tried to break him with everything we have and failed, but we can't simply let him walk away either. We need to find a way to confront him in a way that challenges his spirit. We need to force him to confront the truth about himself and his place in the universe." It was then that the commander came up with an idea. Something that would force the human to face the core of his existence. Something that would push him to his absolute limits, but would also reveal whether his strength truly came from his will to survive, or if it came from something deeper. They set their plan into motion. They would create a situation that would force the human to question everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in. They would confront him with the one thing he could not ignore, the one thing that could shatter his unbreakable resolve. Meanwhile, the human continued to move through the alien territory, his mind clear, his heart strong. He had faced down countless obstacles, and he had overcome them all. But as the days went by, he began to feel something stirring deep within him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't doubt, it was something else, something he had never experienced before, something that gnawed at him and made him question if he was truly alone in this fight. It was then that he received a message. It came in the form of a vision. A dark, shadowy figure appeared before him, its face hidden in darkness, but its voice echoed in his mind. "Human, you are wasting your time. You cannot win this fight. You cannot defeat us. Your fight is meaningless. Your survival is futile." The human stood tall, unfazed by the figure's presence, I fight because I choose to fight, because I will not let you win. I will not let you take away everything I believe in. The figure laughed. You think your will is enough to save you from what is coming. No matter how strong you are, no matter how hard you fight, you are nothing more than a fleeting moment. In the vastness of time, a speck that will be wiped away without a second thought. The human's heart raced, but he stood firm. I am not just a speck. I am a person, I am alive, and I will keep fighting as long as I have breath in my lungs, as long as I have strength in my body. I will not give up. The figure's laugh grew louder. Then prepare yourself for the truth. The vision shifted, and the human found himself standing in a place he had never seen before. It was a desolate wasteland, a place of death and destruction, as far as the eye could see, and standing before him were images of those he loved, people from his past, faces of friends, family, people he had lost over the years. The human's heart clenched in his chest as he saw the faces of those he had loved and lost, each image a painful reminder of the sacrifices he had made, the things he had given up in his fight for survival. What is this? He whispered. What are you trying to show me? Truth you cannot escape. No matter how hard you fight, no matter how much you endure, you will lose everything you love. You will lose everything you hold dear, and in the end you will be alone. The human felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he also felt a deep sadness, a sorrow that threatened to overwhelm him. No, he said through gritted teeth. I will not accept this. I will not give in to your lies. But the figure's voice continued its whispers, like 1,000 voices, all telling him the same thing. You are alone. Your fight is meaningless. You cannot escape your fate. The human stood there for a moment, his mind racing, his heart heavy with the weight of the vision. But then something shifted inside of him, something he hadn't realized until now, something that had been building ever since his journey began. He had already lost so much in his life. He had already faced countless battles and pain, but he had never given up. He had never let anything break him, and this vision was no different. He clenched his fists and spoke the words that would change everything. I am not alone. I fight for myself. I fight for what is right. I fight for the memory of those I've lost, and I will keep fighting no matter what. The vision shattered and the figure disappeared. The human was left standing in the wasteland, but now he felt something new within him. He felt more powerful than ever. He knew now that it wasn't just about survival. It was about the strength of his spirit and his refusal to let anyone or anything destroy what he had fought so hard to preserve. The aliens had pushed him to the brink, but they had also given him the clarity he needed to understand that the true power wasn't in defeating them. It was in never giving up, never surrendering, no matter what the cost. And now he was more determined than ever to show them a new path forward. The battle had taken its toll on both sides. The alien forces had pushed their limits, their patience worn thin by the humans' unrelenting resilience. But what they failed to realize was that the human had changed in ways they couldn't comprehend. He had adapted not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And with each trial he grew stronger, his resolve unshaken, as though the very essence of his being had been forged in fire. Human had faced every challenge they threw at him. He had laughed in the face of their weapons. He had stood tall against their manipulation, their threats, their attempts to break him. And now he found himself at a crossroads, a place where his spirit was tested as never before. He had fought for survival, but now he realized it was something more, something deeper, something that could not be defeated by physical force or fear. The alien forces had realized too late that their greatest weapon was not enough. They had underestimated the human. They had thought him weak and insignificant, but now they knew that he was the embodiment of something they could not control, the very spirit of resistance, the indomitable will to survive no matter the odds, no matter the cost. In the alien command room, the officers sat in silence, staring at the monitors displaying the human's progress. They had expected him to falter, they had expected him to break, but instead he had only become more determined, more resolute than ever before. Their initial plan to defeat him had failed. Now they had no choice but to rethink everything. The commander stood at the front of the room, His eyes focused on the screen before him. The human was still out there, still moving through their territory. Undeterred, his presence felt like a challenge to everything they had ever known about power and survival. They had never faced an adversary like him before, and now they had to confront the uncomfortable truth that they might never defeat him. "What are we supposed to do now?" one of the officers asked, the tension in their voice clear. "We've tried everything, and he keeps coming back stronger. It's like he's not afraid of us anymore. He doesn't fear death." The commander looked at the officer, his face serious. "That's because he doesn't fear death. He embraces it. He has something that we don't understand. And it's not something we can destroy with weapons or force. We have to approach him differently." Another officer spoke up. "You mean we stop fighting him outright?" she asked, her voice skeptical. "Do we just let him go?" The commander shook his head. "No, we can't just let him go, but we can't continue fighting him the way we have been. Either we need to find another way to engage with him. We need to understand him. We need to figure out what makes him tick, why he keeps coming back, why he refuses to give up." The officer nodded slowly. "So you want us to change tactics again?" "Yes," the commander replied. "This is no longer about fighting to win. It's about understanding what we're dealing with, understanding what drives him." Meanwhile, the human was still moving through their territory, his heart pounding with each step, but not out of fear. No, it was something else, something stronger, something that had become a part of him over time. His journey had changed him, had shaped him into someone unrecognizable, someone who wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something deeper, for the very essence of what it meant to be alive, to never give up, no matter the odds, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Had already faced death and come back from the edge. He had already seen the worst of what life had to offer, and yet he had not given in. He had refused to let the darkness swallow him whole, and now he understood that this was the true meaning of strength, not in the physical battles he fought, not in the scars he bore, but in the will to keep moving forward, even when the road was long and the future uncertain. The aliens had pushed him to the limit. They had tested him in ways no one had ever done before, but now he understood that it wasn't just about surviving their attacks. It was about surviving himself, about surviving the doubt, the fear, the uncertainty that had once threatened to overwhelm him in his darkest moments. The human knew that he had to confront this final test, not just to prove his strength to the aliens, but to prove it to himself, to understand what it was that made him keep going, what made him refuse to stop when everything inside of him screamed to give up. And so he continued on his path deeper into their territory, his mind clear, his heart strong. He knew that this was the final test, the final challenge, and whatever came next, he would face it head on, no matter the cost. Back in the command room, the aliens continued their deliberations. They had decided to approach the human not with force, but with understanding. They would meet him in the field not as conquerors, but as equals. They would try to find common ground, to understand what made him tick, to understand why he refused to surrender, why he refused to fall. Commander ordered a team to prepare a meeting with the human. They would send an emissary, someone who could speak to him without the usual weapons and intimidation. They would offer him a chance to explain himself, to understand his motivations, and perhaps they could find a way to coexist with him, or at the very least find a way to reach some kind of compromise. The human was not the enemy they had once thought him to be. He was a force of nature, a force they could not defeat with simple violence and destruction. They had underestimated him because they had been so focused on power. They had not seen the true strength that lay within him. And so as the alien emissary prepared to approach the human for the first time, they would meet as equals and not as enemies. They would learn from one another, and perhaps they would find that even the greatest of adversaries could find common ground in and the human was not afraid of what the future held. He had faced the worst of what life could offer, and still he stood tall and resolute in the face of whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that true strength came not from the ability to defeat others, but from the ability to never give up, never surrender, and to always keep moving forward no matter what life threw at you. Legacy of the human. The aliens had been preparing for this moment. For days their emissary was ready to approach the human face to face. The time had come to end the conflict and confront the unyielding spirit that had pushed them to the very edge of their power. The human had proven himself to be more of resistance and unbreakable will. In the alien command room, the officers watched as the emissary was sent out into the field. They had been following the human's every move. Now they would try to understand him as more than just an adversary. They would learn what drove him, what made him refuse to bend or break under the weight of their power. They hoped that through dialogue and understanding, they could find a way to bring this conflict to an end without further destruction. The human stood alone on the battlefield. The wasteland around him was silent, but he knew the emissary was coming. He had already anticipated their next move. After all, the aliens were predictable in their arrogance. They believed they could always conquer everything they came across, but this human had proven them wrong. He had shown them that there was more to life than mere power and domination. There was something deeper, something that no weapon or technology could destroy. As the emissary approached, the human looked up, his eyes meeting the alien's gaze for the first time in a long while. The alien was unarmed and alone, just as the human had been since the beginning of their conflict. The emissary spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Human, we have come to talk, not to fight. We wish to understand you, to learn from you." The human didn't say anything for a moment. He simply studied the emissary, his gaze piercing, but not with malice, just with the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen too much to be fooled by empty words. At last he spoke. "I don't need you to understand me. I need you to understand yourselves." The emissary's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" The human took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with a quiet power. "You've spent all this time trying to break me, trying to force me to bow to your will, but in the end, it's not about me, it's about you. It's about how you see the universe, how you see life and death, how you see strength and survival. You believe that power comes from weapons and control. You believe that to win, you must crush everything in your path. But that's not strength. True strength comes from within. It comes from knowing that no matter how hard life pushes you, no matter how much pain you endure, you keep going. You never give up. That's what I've learned in my life, and that's why you can't defeat me, because I don't fight for victory. I fight for something more, something that you will never understand." The emissary stood there in silence, absorbing the human's words, his mind racing as he realized the truth of what the human was saying. The strength the human had shown was not a physical power, it was a spiritual one. It was the power of resilience, of the will to keep going in the face of all odds, and the alien forces had never understood that kind of strength. They had always relied on their technology and might to dominate the universe, but they had never encountered something like this before. After a long pause, the emissary spoke again. "We have underestimated you, human. We have seen you as nothing more than an obstacle to be overcome. But now we see that we have been wrong. Your strength comes from your spirit, your will to survive, and to fight for something greater than yourself, and in that we have much to learn from you." The human looked at the emissary for a long moment before speaking again. "You've wasted so much time trying to defeat me, but now that you understand you can stop the fighting, there's no need for further conflict. We don't need to be enemies, we can coexist, we can learn from each other and build something better together." The emissary's eyes widened at the human's words. It was a revelation to him, something that had never occurred to the alien forces. Before, they had always seen themselves as superior. They had always believed that their strength was the key to victory, but now they were realizing that true strength lay not in domination, but in unity and understanding. For the first time since their encounter, the emissary felt a sense of humility. He had come to conquer, but now he was learning to listen, to learn from the human who had shown him that there was more to life than power, more to life than simply winning the fight. The emissary bowed his head in respect. "You are right, human. We have learned much from you, more than we ever expected to learn from any species, and for that we owe you our respect." The human nodded slowly, his eyes softening as he spoke. I don't need your respect, I just need you to understand that survival isn't about who has the biggest weapon or the most power. It's about who refuses to give up, who refuses to let the world break them. That's what makes us strong. And that's why we'll always win." The emissary stood for a moment contemplating the human's words before he turned. "To leave, we will go back to our people and share what we have learned. We will tell them of your strength, your spirit, and your will to survive. And we will try to make them understand that there is more to strength than destruction." The human watched the emissary leave his mind at peace for the first time in a long while. The battle had been long and hard, but now he understood that this was not just about survival. It was about understanding the true nature of strength and resilience. It was about knowing that no matter how many times life knocked you down, you could always get back up and keep fighting. Alien forces returned to their ships. They had been changed by their encounter with the human. They had come to understand that there was more to power than just physical strength. They had come to realize that true strength came from within, and it was something that no weapon could destroy. The human walked away from the battlefield, not as a conqueror, but as a symbol of something greater, something that would live on long after this conflict was over. He had shown them that the greatest strength lay not in defeating others, but in never giving up, never surrendering, and always finding the strength to move forward, no matter what. And so the legacy of the human was not one of violence or war. It was one of resilience, one of unyielding spirit that could never be broken. And in that legacy, the aliens found the lesson. They had been searching for the lesson that would change the way they saw the universe forever. The battle had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet understanding that echoed across the alien universe. The human stood alone on the battlefield, no longer facing the enemy, but facing something much larger, something that transcended all the violence and all the destruction he had endured. It was a realization of his own strength, his own purpose in the grand scheme of the universe. Alien forces had retreated not in shame, but in respect. They had come to understand that true power was not measured by the size of weapons or the might of an army, but by the strength of the spirit that refused to break, the resilience that pushed one to keep going, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. The emissary had gone back to his people to share the lessons learned from the human, the lesson of resilience, the lesson of never giving up, even when the world tries to tear you down. The aliens now knew that strength was not about domination, but about the will to survive and to learn and to grow from every challenge life throws at you. Human didn't need victory. He didn't need glory. What he needed was peace, a peace that came not from defeating others, but from understanding the true nature of strength and survival. He had learned through his battles that it wasn't just about overcoming the enemy, but about understanding oneself and finding the courage to keep going, no matter what. And so the human walked away from the battlefield a different person than the one who had stepped onto it all those days ago. He had faced death. He had faced pain. He had faced doubt and fear, and he had come through it stronger, not because of the battles he had fought, but because of the strength he had found within himself, the strength to never give up. Alien forces would never forget the lesson they had learned that day, and neither would the human. He had shown them that even in a universe full of chaos and destruction, there was always a way forward, a way to rise above the darkness and to become something greater than yourself. And as the stars continued to shine above the battlefield, the human knew one thing for sure: no matter what the future held, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same strength, the same resilience that had carried him through all the trials of his life. And in that strength he found the true meaning of survival, the true meaning of life itself. The end.